Hello and welcome to Magnify Matters, a podcast proudly produced by Catholic Education Sandhurst. Teaching a child to read is one of the most powerful things we can do. In this episode of Magnify Matters, host Tim Edwards is joined by Robyn Wheldall and Iain Rothwell from MultiLit to discuss their mission, making sure every child in every school has access to high-quality, evidence-based literacy instruction. Now celebrating its 30th year, MultiLit is one of Australia's most trusted names in reading instruction, grounded in the science of learning, shaped by research and focused on outcomes that matter. In this episode, we explore the story behind MultiLit's 30-year journey from a university research project to 6,500 plus schools, why early literacy is the foundation for lifelong learning, how MultiLit's tiered programs are reducing the number of struggling readers, the importance of system-level change and why whole school implementation matters, MultiLit's work in closing the gap with 42 majority Indigenous schools, and what's next in improving literacy in our country. Whether you're a classroom teacher, school leader, or a parent invested in the future of learning, this episode offers powerful insight into the kind of instruction that transforms lives. Now stay with us as we magnify what truly matters.
It's with great pleasure that we welcome Robyn Wheldall and Iain Rothwell from MultiLit to Magnify Matters today. Iain and Robyn, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tim.
Great to be here, Tim.
Iain, we'll start with you. You're currently the Managing Director. Tell us a little bit about your work and role at MultiLit.
My involvement with the MultiLit goes back quite some time. So Robyn and I both worked at Macquarie University, and Robyn was part of the research team, but my role at the university was to look after commercial activities, one of which was a research centre called MultiLit. And that was in the early 2000s. So I started in 2002, so more than 20 years ago. And about 20 years ago, 2005, I was invited by Robyn and Kevin to witness a major project that they had at Cape York, working in partnership with Noel Pearson and the Cape York Partnership. And we were implementing an early literacy program across 4 schools. So in many ways, a forerunner of what we're doing with Magnify, but on a much smaller scale. But dare I say, at the time, we were a much smaller organisation, and the requirements of that project were quite substantial, getting staff, resources, and even a vehicle up to far north Queensland. And I went up there on that invitation and also had a strong involvement, and Kevin and Robyn and I had always worked really strongly as a team. It was my opportunity to actually see the Reading Tutor program in action in a school setting with a tutor and a student. So these were students that were low progress readers that were struggling with their literacy. And I was awestruck. There's obviously a huge amount of science in our programs and in the development. But what struck me was almost the magic of a teacher engaged with a student and the pace and the positive encouragement. And you could almost witness the learning happening. And as I said, in one of the most remote parts of Australia, that was in Cowan. And I remember being so impacted by that we came back to Cairns, Robyn, Kevin and I suggested to them that we should take MultiLit and we should form a company, and we did.
Brilliant start for us, Iain. We might pause there and join some of those other dots as well. So Robyn is currently the director of the MultiLit Research Unit and was the founding director of MultiLit. And we're celebrating at MultiLit this year a birthday, I believe.
We are celebrating 30 years of MultiLit this year, which is really exciting. And I am one of 3 founding directors of the MultiLit company. So Kevin Wheldall and Iain and I are the founding directors of the MultiLit company. But MultiLit started well before the company was incorporated, back in Macquarie University Special Education Centre, where Kevin Wheldall was the director and professor of education, and I was the research and development manager at that time. And we started working together on MultiLit specifically in 1995, but there were several years before that that we were laying some foundational work. So we had this great opportunity in the university to develop a program, do the research, put it into practice, and do that time and time and time again. And that was the foundation of MultiLit, the first MultiLit program, which Iain mentioned was the MultiLit Reading Tutor Program. And we started out working with older, low progress readers. We've moved quite a lot in the 30 years, but that's where we started. So, MultiLit's been part of me for many decades. Sometimes it feels like that, but I'm very, very fortunate and feel very blessed to have been able to contribute to the work that MultiLit does.
Well, congratulations on 30 years, and to you both and Kevin on the establishment of all that you've done over the last 30 years. You said some earlier work in the origins of MultiLit, what you tried to attend to. Talk to us about the scope of the work as it's expanded and the breadth to where MultiLit spreads 30 years on.
Right. Well, as I said, we were working on developing the MultiLit Reading Tutor Program initially, which was designed to catch those students who were heading towards secondary school without the requisite literacy skills to cope with the secondary curriculum. So we were really concerned about those kids who, in a sense, were reaching years 5 and 6 who just wouldn't have coped at all in secondary school. So that was our initial focus, and we developed a program that we believed reflected what the research evidence shows, that the teaching of systematic phonics is absolutely critical when teaching kids to read. So there was a very strong phonics engine in the MultiLit Reading Tutor Program. But it wasn't just phonics, it was also recognising words that aren't easily decoded using phonic decoding skills, and also the importance of getting kids into reading connected text so they can generalise and practice their skills. And that was the core of that program, and it became very successful. And we were invited by the Reverend Bill Cruz to implement this in tutorial centres that he established in the inner suburbs of Sydney and in Redfern, later in Queensland and the Northern Territory. And we were able to roll out versions of this program that taught many, many children going through two school terms at a time, older, low progress readers. But our work over the years then led us to think, well, actually, if we didn't have these kids to catch towards the end of their primary school career, it would be much better for the kids, be much better for the schools, much better for the education systems if we didn't see the large numbers of kids coming through who needed support. So we turned our attention to younger students, and we decided to develop an intervention program called MiniLit, which we believed could be delivered in years 1 and 2 for kids who were struggling to get the foundations of reading. And if we could catch those kids up with a small group evidence-based program, we'd have far fewer kids progressing into the later primary school years with poor reading skills. So we developed MiniLit.
So Robyn, just there, that was the first program that you mentioned. Is that now what has become known as MacLit, and then you develop MiniLit, or is MacLit a subtle variation to that?
MacLit's further variation. It does have similar elements to the Reading Tutor Program, but is more elaborated. So MacLit was published in 2016, and it's actually an hour's worth of instruction, and we're very proud of MacLit. It can be really well delivered in a group format. And so in a sense, the Reading Tutor Program, which was originally designed as a one-to-one program, as we did years and years of delivering this in groups, that helped us develop MacLit. And because we were also responding to the data around response to intervention, we knew that if kids were struggling in the whole class in Tier 1, if they could go into Tier 2, into a small group instruction, that could be really effective, much more cost effective than one-to-one instruction. So we turned our focus on a Tier 2 younger program being MiniLit, and then a Tier 2 older program being MacLit. And MacLit, even though the Reading Tutor Program was being used from Year 2 upwards, MacLit goes well into the high school years. So it's a really robust program. We're very proud of MacLit and the way that it can deliver support to those kids who need it. So there we were busy doing Tier 2 programs, and then we thought, well, maybe we wouldn't have so many Tier 2 kids if we got Tier 1 right. And we thought, well, maybe we should move out of our, in quotes, remediation space and move into the initial teaching of reading space. Because actually, what we really want is kids to be taught well from the get-go, and then all that we have to deal with are the kids who aren't doing so well. We want to reduce the size of students who have to go from Tier 1 to Tier 2. And so that was the origin of MultiLit. And we started working on MultiLit in around 2013. And we are really delighted that we now have this beautiful Foundation to 2 program that schools are taking up and having great success with, reducing the number of kids who are having to move to Tier 2, and also that the knowledge that is being built in the teacher community as well is very satisfying, because for kids who are going into Tier 2 and some into Tier 3, it's really important that when they spend most of their time in the Tier 1 classroom, that teachers understand about the science of reading, what makes for effective instruction. So we feel we've developed the suite of programs that can meet the needs of all children.
And Robyn, you articulated it really well to talk about that, you can't intervene your way out of a Tier 1 challenge in terms of instructional challenge. So we're very pleased at Magnify Sandhurst to partner with MultiLit on all levels of that for all of our learners, from initial lit, F2, mini-lit, Sage into MacLit. And as you've mentioned, it may be required into secondary schools, and we're very pleased to have had some staff trained in that space. We'll talk more about the Magnify partnership a little later on. Iain, just in terms of the scope and breadth of the work that MultiLit undertake as an organisation, can you give us some bearing as to perhaps a number of schools involved or systems involved or learners that are undertaking a MultiLit program?
We started, as we indicated, from very, very humble beginnings in as it were, 4 schools. But we've grown. A MultiLit program is now in more than 6,000 schools, about 6,500 schools around Australia, and in fact also schools overseas. As Robyn indicated, that the focus was initially around intervention, but building out the response to intervention portfolio, the focus has now extended to Tier 1 with MultiLit, but also other programs. We're developing in writing, we're developing in spelling and oral language. So rounding out the portfolio across the full literacy spectrum, as well as other areas. I think that one of the significant steps we made as an organisation, not long after we formed the business, we found that we're working with government, we're working with not-for-profit organisations. We found that somewhat at times troublesome, and we made a big strategic shift. So, as Robyn indicated, we went down this path that we had this vast knowledge and a research team, so this vast engine to develop programs. But we made a philosophical view that every child had the right to learn to read, in a sense, a human right, but that should best happen in a school. And so we've really transitioned our focus on schools, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've had such a big impact, as I said, more than 6,500 schools. And we also were really conscious of the fact that fidelity of instruction in the classroom was what was going to ensure our programs actually work. Our programs are extensively trialled, so they go through multiple stages of trialling in actual schools, in actual classrooms, with real teachers and real students. And we have a vast amount of data knowing that the programs are effective before they're formally released. But we realise that the weakness in that whole sort of value chain from us to the teachers is the program delivered in the classroom with a high level of fidelity? And so we wrapped all our programs with professional development programs, which we mandate as part of the sale. But what that does is ensure that there's a deeper understanding around the program and some confidence that it will be delivered with integrity. Increasingly, and I guess what we've been able to do with Magnify is extend that relationship way beyond just the transaction of undertaking professional development and the undertaking a program to a more supported model within the school and across the system, where we have, as part of that scaling up of serving 6,000 schools, we've built a large school partnership team. And most of those are senior teachers, and they have a vast amount of skill. They're very conversant in the science of reading and the science of instruction, and they're able, and obviously very conversant around our own programs, and able to provide instructional assistance to schools and teachers around the most effective way. And particularly the area that a lot of schools are challenged with is around the use of data and to inform instruction. And all our programs are predicated on being informed. It's not a guesswork to understand whether a student needs extra support. It's known as a consequence of the screening and assessment tools that are built into the program, but not all teachers necessarily know how to use that data. And so one of the areas that we are able through our school partnership team is to focus that skill, that body, that team, to assist teachers and how you use that data to affect instruction and bring that response to intervention framework into play.
Thanks for that, Iain. That you touched on, and you both have aspects of the Magnify Sandhurst partnership, and I know that was something that was front and centre for the steering committee and for us at the office as we sought partnership and the capacity to train en masse. We've had more than 500 staff trained in initial lit and others in mini-lit, Sage and MacLit already late last year and early this year. And the capacity to train en masse, the system level support was something that we really sought out, and has been fabulous to have your people work so closely with ours at both a school level and an office level. And I think that's something that's going to hold us in good stead as we move forward. Robyn, just in terms of the design of, if we can talk about initial lit for a moment, Iain touched on data and the screening, progress monitoring, cumulative data. Can you give our listeners, and keeping in mind that they might be some parents or some people from outside of education, a bit of an overview around what's collected and why and how that informs instruction?
One of the principal things that is critical for teachers to know is what their students know. So we have to check that where are kids in relation to the skills that you're teaching. And so we screen kids coming in and we say, okay, what sort of skills have they got? So the teacher gets an idea of where the spread, often there's quite a big spread initially as kids start off in school. They've had varying preschool experiences and what have you. But it's very important to know, okay, who knows what? And that informs basic things like groupings so that there can be more targeted instruction according to the needs of the student. One of the principles that we have worked on for over 30 years, coming from the background that we do, is that mastery has to occur for students to learn and be able to move on. So we're not interested in just teaching content and hoping that kids will actually get it. We're checking. And that's the purpose of the monitoring that goes on in the program. And so we actually need to check, do we think students have got what we've been teaching? You can do that informally. You can do that as a teacher, just observing students in the classroom. But we also like to record who knows this stuff and can we place a tick. The purpose of cumulative reviews, which happen every term, is that we need to see if things have stuck. So it's also a very important principle in the way that we teach, is that you go back and you revisit material that's been taught previously to make sure it's been retained. And the kids have to retrieve that knowledge, and in retrieving that knowledge, it demonstrates to the teacher that they have actually got it. It has stuck. So if it hasn't stuck, there needs to be reteaching done for those kids who haven't got it. So this, it's really a data-based instruction approach. And it's basically saying, okay, I'm going to teach well. I'm going to assess to see if my students have got it. Some of them will need more repetition, because that's just the nature of the variety of human brains. Some brains will get things first go, others need more repetition. And knowing which kids need more repetitions, or more reps as we call it, is done by doing those assessment pieces in the progress monitoring. Reteaching occurs, retesting occurs, and that way you know if you can move on. You only move on when you're confident the kid has got it. So that is the nature of what it sounds a little bit scary, reviews and assessment and all this sort of stuff, but it's a really critical piece of instruction, particularly instruction in foundational skills. And it gives the teacher knowledge of where her students are at. Now, in initial ed, We know that there's on the mat time where teachers are teaching directly to the whole group of students. And then there's time when students go into different groups to do different activities. Now, the teacher using the data effectively will pitch the activity that particular group of students will do in the time that they're doing that, so that they're getting an opportunity to get more practice. And then the teacher will also know which group she or he may need to spend a bit more time doing more direct teaching before the practice comes in. So all of that is guiding those groups that are an important part of MultiLit. So all of that information is what is informing that process.
Thanks, Robyn. It is excellent to hear you speak to that with such clarity, and I know that we will have many of our Sandhurst staff going, oh, aha, because some items that you touched on, we've recently touched on together with Dr. Jared Cooney-Horvath in the science of learning. There's also many that have researched a bit further the work of Step Lab and the work that happens there in terms of instructional coaching, and our partnership with OCA that focuses on knowledge-rich curriculum. Jared, when he worked with our staff, would touch base on facts come first, and that's very much aligned with what you're talking about there in terms of the additional check for understanding and recall and retrieval practice and repetition of practice. They're all terms that I hope that increasingly our staff across Sandhurst are able to pull those threads together. So thanks for making those really outlined and known to us again. Can I just touch on MultiLit? If we go over 30 years again, no doubt you've seen an enormous amount in terms of where literacy stands internationally, but also here in Australia. The reading wars are no secret. Robyn and or Iain, you take this where you need to. How have you managed all of that, and what have you learned, and how do you feel we're positioned in Australia in 2025?
Well, the reading wars are real. We've all got scars to prove it. I think it's an incredible shame that something like reading, which, as we all know, is the foundational skill of all further knowledge, I really think it's such a great shame that it gets politicised. But it has been politicised. It's been politicised for decades. So how have we managed that? Well, it's been a tough road. But I believe that if you know what you're trying to achieve, and having worked in learning difficulties for a very long time, we have seen the impact of good instruction on kids' lives. So if you can see how a child's life has been changed in that moment and also their life trajectory, it gives you an enormous amount of passion and courage to keep pressing towards the goal that all students should receive effective instruction in reading. Not only in reading, also in numeracy and mathematics, but our focus has been on reading. So seeing that change in children gives you a focus. And so staying true to that purpose, staying the course, not getting too buffeted by the attacks, which there have been and there are, but staying firm in your conviction that you can make a difference is really critical. But I would also say that extraordinary perseverance is also required. So things move slowly, and you have to have a strong conviction that you are heading in the right direction, which means you follow the evidence. Evidence is emerging all of the time. You have to remain current in your knowledge, but you follow the evidence. The other thing that I would say is that you find your tribe. So when we were working in the early days in the Special Education Centre at Macquarie, there were many slings and arrows, but we had really great colleagues with us. And so we found our people, and we actually basically supported one another. So I think it's really important to have the people around you who can actually help you stay the course. And we are still working with some of those people 30 years on. Brilliant people who contribute so much to what we do. A great privilege to work with them. So find your tribe. And the other thing is just keep on keeping on. Just keep on keeping on. Where are we in Australia? Well, you know, a lot of people talk about, oh, it's terrible, it's shocking, it's awful. But actually, having looked at this over 30 years, we have made huge progress. We have made big strides. And I think that we should reflect on that and be very, very pleased with where we've come. I used to get phone calls from people when I was at the Special Education Centre in the 90s, saying, I use your program, but I don't tell anybody. I have to hide the manual under the desk. If I admitted to using your program, I would be sacked, which I would go, what? That's crazy. But then they'd say, and the worst part of it is, I get great results. And they say, see, our literacy strategy is working, when it's not their strategy at all. So I would just go, just keep using the program, just keep, helping those kids. So we're not in that space anymore. And there have been many things happening in Australia and also in the international community that have helped advance the cause and where we are now today. So we have made great progress.
Thank you for your passion to hold the course. And no doubt that's brought, as Iain said, many along with you with 6,500 schools engaged with MultiLit. We're very happy that 51 Sandhurst schools are engaged in MultiLit. Iain, from your perspective as Managing Director, how have you found the Sandhurst partnership to this point?
From my perspective, I think it's been, and it's not to downgrade any of the other partnerships, but I think it's become our strongest partnership. And what I like about it is it's been very comprehensive. It's been rooted around professional development and a faith in the science of reading and the science of instruction and our ability to contribute to that across our team. So it has been a true partnership, and the fact that all the schools in the system took up the programs, all the teachers undertook the professional development, and we have more deeper professional development via the Academy's course in effective reading and spelling. That is a level of commitment that's, as I said, is to this date unsurpassed by any other group that we've worked with. Obviously, it's early days at this stage, but great enthusiasm and energy. I've been to a couple of your forums. I've sat in and listened to them, and the passion that you have as leaders and the way in which that's conveyed across not only the leadership but into the schools, it's infective. And we've seen that. We're getting that bounce back through our own training. As you would anticipate through we've done lots of, as you said, over 500 of your teachers have been trained. I'm not sure how many workshops that is, but it's a lot of workshops. And we have a feedback loop through that, and the feedback loop that has come back to us has been very passionate. And currently we've got 44 teachers that are engaged, as I said, in that online course around effective reading and spelling. And again, that's the biggest single cohort we've had go through. The feedback from the Academy staff helping support and facilitate that course is it's been the most engaged team that they've had. The feedback they've had is really positive, but really a real thirst for knowledge, a real thirst for engagement. And as I said, we think that's wonderful, because our training provides a level around the program, but the Academy's course provides a much deeper view around the science that actually underpins the program.
And we might just go there, Iain, that Academy course, and thanks for your flattering words that extend to all of our teachers. I love there was a word, I'm going to miss it, but there was a word you said then that was very well put, and it was something to say that it was a passionate level of feedback. It doesn't always mean that people are in absolute agreement with or support of, but we're very proud of our staff in our schools that have put their hand up with their questions, that have been prepared to go through the process to learn more, to be challenged by, and to learn alongside their peers. So I think the value of the partnership and the mechanisms that we have in place to allow that are really, really important. You touched on the Academy, and Robyn, we might go to you to explain more around the science of that, because I believe you're a co-author of the book that this Academy is based on. So do you mind giving us a bit of a rundown as to the theory behind the course and the detail of that?
Sure. You're generous to say I'm a co-author. I'm a co-editor. So I did contribute to some of the chapters, but the course is based on the book Effective Instruction in Reading and Spelling. And we gathered from within our own team and from other esteemed colleagues, both from within Australia and overseas, people to write chapters on what we considered to be the core components of effective instruction in reading and spelling. And the course basically follows that format, which we're really pleased to see is being so well used in this partnership. So we really thank you for that, because it's very important. And I think, understanding not only the how, training in the programs, but the why, getting into the research behind and the science behind how learning to read happens. The course is very much structured around what we believe makes for effective instruction in reading and spelling. And so we start off with the alphabetic principle, which is actually at the foundation of learning to read. So being able to teach students about the correspondence between the phonemes, the sounds in spoken English, and the graphemes, the letters that we have that make up our alphabet, is actually the core skill of learning to read. So we have a great deal of focus on the alphabetic principle. We talk about in the book and in the course the importance of phonemic awareness. And we talk about how students detect the sounds in spoken English, how they can sort of identify them, manipulate them so that they can use them as discrete sounds. So that's what we talk about, phonemic awareness. So phonemic awareness is extraordinarily important when you're learning to read. Phonics, that great powerhouse that we hear so much about. Phonics, there's a whole section on phonics and word reading. You have to teach the relationship between grapheme and phoneme, as I said before, to make sense of phonics, to make sense of words, how to get words off the page. And so there's a whole long chapter that Jennifer and I wrote about phonics and how you teach phonics. It's all very well to have word knowledge, word recognition skills, which phonics will give you, but you have to be fluent to be able to understand what you're reading. So there's an emphasis on reading fluency. Sometimes fluency is a bit of the poor cousin to phonics, and we have to remember that accuracy, lifting the words off the page, is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You have to be accurate and fluent to become a good reader. So there's a whole section devoted to fluency. Spelling basically is the reciprocal process of encoding and decoding. Getting words off the page is phonics. Putting words on the page is spelling. That's decoding and encoding. They're two sides of the same coin. So we always know that we have to work on spelling alongside reading because they are part of the same process. So we have a whole chapter, a whole unit, a whole section of the course on spelling. Then we have comprehension, that wily thing, comprehension. And comprehension is difficult, but comprehension happens when students have good vocabulary. So we actually have to make sure we've got good vocabulary skills happening for children. And this is part of the language part of the simple view of reading, which is what underpins our whole approach through this book. We adopt the simple view of reading as the theoretical framework. And so we know that the simple view of reading, which was put forward in 1986, so it's not new, by Goff and Tunma, basically two components, language comprehension and word recognition or decoding. Now, in the language comprehension side, we have to have good knowledge of how language works, syntax, actual vocabulary, all of those structures in our language, so what kids hear has to marry what they see with the words on the page, the decoding or word recognition, for them to be able to make sense of what they're reading. So the simple view of reading posits that language comprehension and word recognition or decoding, you need both of those elements to end up with reading comprehension. So comprehension is the product of language comprehension and decoding. So we look into that language side of the simple view as well in the course. It's critically important. And then we have to put it all together. So we know all these things, but how do you fit all of that into the amount of instructional time you have in the classroom? Instructional time is so precious. It goes so quickly. So we have to make sure what to focus on when to shift the emphasis, when to, having checked for understanding in your students, when to move them into a slightly different phase. And we cover that all in the chapter in the book and in the course called Putting It All Together. So we believe that by the time we've worked through all of the elements, and of course the elements, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, they were the 5 big ideas that came out of the National Reading Panel in 2000, and they're the things that we hang our instruction around. I mean, they're big areas. So we have to know how to teach it, how we were talking before about the science of instruction, not just the science of, reading. The science of instruction is really important. So we put all these things together and then we try and have a practical, how do you bring it together in a lesson? How do you bring it together in the classroom? So for those doing our course, we hope that they come to the end of that with a knowledge of all of those things and then how that can be synthesised into a practical program of instruction. So that's what we're hoping to achieve.
Thanks for a comprehensive overview of the program. We have, as Iain said, 44 in the first intake. We expect to have more in the semester 2 intake. I received a phone call from Sharon Cheers from MultiLit this morning saying, Tim, has your team got that date for semester 2 takeoff yet? So good on Sharon for holding us to account there. We know that there will be a solid uptake to follow on from those that have participated in the first intake. So we really look forward to that. Robyn, you mentioned then, I'd just like to go through a bit of a time frame. You mentioned the Simple View of Reading from 1986. You mentioned the National Reading Panel. There's also the UK and US, the Rose Report and the National Inquiry into Reading in 2005, 2006. Correct me if I'm wrong in the time frame here. The Grattan Reading Report dropped far more recently, and you're currently a literacy expert in the National Catholic Education Commission Educational Excellence Standing Committee. So there's more than 30 years in that breadth of experience. You've done well to hold the course and committed to that. But where to next in literacy in Australia and beyond?
Yes, it's a good point. And I think just going back to your point about the various inquiries that happened around the world, I think that has helped solidify the movements in various countries. The US National Reading Panel started its work in 1997 and reported in 2000. And then in 2005, we had the National Inquiry into the Teaching of Literacy in Australia. So that was important, and that really echoed the findings from the National Reading Panel and put a very big spotlight on the need for direct, systematic phonics instruction. So that was very important. The following year, 2006, was the Rose Review in the UK, actually England. And I think the big takeaway from the Rose report was that he actually highlighted the simple view of reading. Jim Rose actually sort of made a point of this should be a theoretical framework. So we have Jim Rose to thank for bringing the simple view of reading into this millennium and people taking more notice of it. And the other thing that the Rose report did in the UK was to emphasise the importance or the benefit of synthetic phonics. So synthetic not meaning plastic, but synthetic meaning blending through the word, which is the approach that we take in our programs. So systematic synthetic phonics was what we took away from the Rose report. So all of these reports have played their part, and but as I said before, progress is slow, but there've been movements in all of these countries. And in Australia, the Grattan Institute's also been doing fantastic work, and we're very grateful to them for that. But also, state governments around the country are changing their approach. We've had inquiries in several of the states. South Australia was the first off the rank. They introduced the phonics screening check early in 2016, much earlier than other places, and had the literacy guarantee unit. And one by one, the states have sort of coming to the table, not least because we have an education minister, Jason Clare, who has made some of the funding that the Commonwealth provides contingent upon approaching including explicit instruction approaches, teaching phonics, and that has helped in the latest negotiations of the National School Reform Agreements that the schools are committed to doing some things that have a good, solid evidence base. So I'm really optimistic. Where to from here? I think we still have a great deal of work to do in writing. We've moved a long way in the reading. Having said that, we've got a long way more to go in reading, and I salute what you're doing with Magnify, because system change is what actually shifts the needle. We require system change. So systems have to have all of the things that you've got in place to actually bring about reform and for that to stick, because in education there's a very high incidence of what I would call faddism, that we try something, is it working? Maybe not. Oh, well, we're sick of it, we'll move on. And this is also part of staying the course. But you can stay the course much better when you have a system that's got all the supports wrapped around it, and it supports individual teachers in the classroom. This is what we need. So we need more system implementations like what you're doing. I'd be much more confident that my grandchildren will enter a classroom that's doing what I think should happen if we have big changes at system level. But we do need to do more with writing. You mentioned before that we are working on a writing program, and that's because we see the need. So writing is very much related to reading, but the writing performance of Australian students is pretty poor. So we have to do our work in that area, because even in a digital age, written skills are critically important. So that's a focus for us, as is the importance of the language side of the simple view of reading. So phonics has got a lot of attention, and I am a massive phonics advocate. You have to have a phonics engine in teaching beginning reading. But we have to also pay attention to the language side. And sometimes I think that can be a bit left out. Sometimes we hear schools say, I love initially, we don't do the storybook reading component because we just do that some other way during the day, and it just makes my heart break, because actually the storybook component is really critically important to help develop those language skills. And we know that some kids get through the early years of school, or the first year of school, and their language skills are what is letting them down, which is why we develop Language Lift, which I neglected to mention before, as a Tier 2 program, because language is really important, especially for kids who are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. So let's not forget about the language side of the simple view of reading. And I think the other thing too, and I know that there's great work going on in this area, is for a knowledge of effective instruction. So what makes for effective instruction, not just in reading, also in numeracy and maths, but across all areas of the curriculum. What makes for effective instruction? I think we need a bit more oomph in that area.
Thanks, Robyn. I'm hearing that we've made some good progress, but it's 2025 and there's still another 30 in you and MultiLit to continue that good work, as the focus and challenge continues and remains on reading, but also needs to perhaps address some of those other areas in more rigour. Not perhaps, 100%, I agree. And we look forward to partnering in some of that work, and we know that the MultiLit team will be behind that and supportive of all of the schools in Sandhurst as that happens. You just touched on something in terms of some people from a background perhaps less fortunate, and I'm aware of some excellent work that Iain has filled me in on as well that's happening in the Closing the Gap space. Iain, do you just want to give a bit of an overview of the Closing the Gap work that MultiLit are doing?
Back in 2022, the end of 2022, the Commonwealth awarded MultiLit an agreement to provide a comprehensive literacy program to was a minimum of 40 majority Indigenous schools. As it turned out, we ended up with 42 majority Indigenous schools, which I think is the largest literacy initiative in Australia for Indigenous students. That touches about 2,500 students, so it's a very large program. But I think what's significant about it is that these would be some of the most disadvantaged schools in Australia. So most of the schools are remote or very remote. And we do measure disadvantage in the Australian education system. ICSEA is the measure. The average ICSEA for those 42 schools, the average is just over 700. So that's 3 standard deviations from the mean. So we are talking generationally disadvantaged communities, and what we've been able to do is provide a really comprehensive program that's like Sandhurst. We have the programs, we have the professional development, but we also have the Tier 3 tuition, so we're actually able to provide, the sort of issues that these schools face are large churn around the student attendance. Student attendance is a big problem. Most of the schools don't achieve an 80% attendance rate. Most are less than 80%. And when you think about it, 80% seems a high number, but in actual fact, that's a day off a week for the child. That's a lot of learning missed. And so the schools also have very high staff turnover. These are being in very remote communities. And of course, there's a national teaching shortage at the moment. These are schools that are very vulnerable, very difficult to attract leadership, and very difficult to attract teachers. So what we have been able to do is wrap a comprehensive supported model of literacy instruction. We do face-to-face as well as online support, and we've been able to provide not just the excellent Tier 1 and 2 small group work, but also Tier 3, we have students that I guess are the ones with the biggest learning deficit are able to access our expertise within a capital city to have one-on-one tuition. That program is, as I said, funded by the Commonwealth. It will be subject to an independent evaluation through ASA, and we're going through that process now. As is always the case, we are gathering a huge amount of data around that. We're using that data firstly to help the teachers inform instruction. I think my observation, and I've been to a number of these schools, is that what's surprising for often very small schools and very small classes, is the variation in a single class is quite enormous. And so the instruction needs to be tiered to the student's needs and to where the student is at. The benefit of utilising our programs, is it provides a lot of structure around that experience, but it's also very informed by data. So there's an understanding of exactly what the student needs and whether that reinforced work, for example, in the small group scenario, is properly targeted to the gaps that the students have. Early indications are that we're getting very, very positive data across all the schools, but bearing in mind the gaps and the disadvantage here is very substantial. It probably takes 2 years to really get effective instruction embedded in the school. By then, the school and the systems around instruction are embedded. The leadership understand the cadence of instruction, as Robyn indicated, the cumulative reviews at the end of each term, the submission of data, viewing that with our support to identify the students that might need the additional support. And as I said, that's been working really, really well. And now we're finding that the students, the schools themselves, are becoming much more autonomous, much more able to utilise the data themselves and able to impact their students directly without hand-holding, which is wonderful to see.
Congratulations on that really critical work. We finished by looking at what matters most, and I'll give you a moment to perhaps have a think about that. From everything we've discussed today, we know that attending to students and people from disadvantaged and challenging backgrounds, of course, matters most. So I'll ask that we all keep that in our mind. But in terms of other topics and conversation that we've had today, I'll go to you in a moment. It is just great to hear, even in that context of closing the gap. And I was lucky enough to have a conversation with a couple of your staff members recently who were able to share verbally some of the success that's taken place in different communities. So again, congratulations. Iain, it was good to hear, though, you talking about the cadence of instruction and familiarisation in that space and leadership awareness of some of those things. I can't help but think that's the exact same process that's going to happen in all of our Sandhurst schools as we continue to implement various MultiLit programs. So we know that it will take a little bit of time, but we also know that the partnership is valued and we'll have your support. So thanks so much in advance for that. And I've given you a little bit of think time now. So from everything we've discussed today, Robyn, Wheldall, what matters most?
Well, I think what matters most is that we follow what we're learning from the science. So the science is continually evolving. We have every reason to believe that the things we are doing is the right approach, but we should keep up to date, we should increase our knowledge, and we should make sure that what we know to be right is what's happening in classrooms. So we have an extraordinary privilege teaching children. We have an extraordinary opportunity to affect their life outcomes. And so it's a very sacred duty to get these kids on their learning journey. And so we need to bring our best efforts, our best knowledge to the task. And we just have to keep doing that to make sure we have a strong, well-educated and healthy nation.
Iain, Rothwell, your view of what matters most from today's discussion?
Well, it's bedding down early literacy. I mean, it is obviously the founding place for MultiLit, but, in terms of one of society's big problems that needs to be tackled, and I should say, as I said, Robyn talked about the history of the reading wars and then all the reports, etc. But the one really positive indicator is, I think, of all the NAPLAN indicators, most of them still heading south. They're yet to sort of correct and level and head north. But the one indicator that I think is actually heading north is early reading across Australia. We think that's the most important skill. It's a foundational skill for all other education, and we know that literacy and ultimately education attainment is associated, and we know this from the work of the Grattan Institute, it's associated with all other positive indicators of life, whether it's the ability to reach your potential educationally, but also financially, health. Every other indicator it ends up being tied to educational attainment. So without literacy, you are hampered in all your life outcomes. And so we anchor MultiLit anchors itself in that early literacy, and ensuring that every child learns to read is that we meet that human right.
Thanks, Iain. Iain and Robyn, it's been a pleasure working with MultiLit over the last 6 months and slightly longer as we commenced our training last year. We thank you for your commitment to our partnership and working with our other partners in Magnify Sandhurst. We know that the journey ahead is going to have lots of questions and lots of discussion together, and we really look forward to our time ahead in the next few years and beyond as partners of Magnify Sandhurst. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Tim. We look forward to it too.
Thanks, Tim.
That's it for this episode of Magnify Matters. Make sure to follow the show and share it with someone who cares about great teaching and learning. You can also leave a review or connect with us online at Catholic Education Sandhurst. Until next time, stay with us as we magnify what truly matters.
Catholic Education Sandhurst acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.